Hi, my name is Randy Reed. I'm the editor and publisher of the EdisonReport, which is delighted to co-sponsor the National Lighting Bureau's annual Lighting Forum. We're here at the studios of the forum's other co-sponsor, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, where I am moderating 6 panel discussions. This panel is titled Smart Cities and Connected Lighting. Our panelists are Shelli Sedlack with Current, powered by GE, Mark Lien of the Illuminating Engineering Society, and Jim Benya with the Benya Burnett Consultancy. Welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
Jim, what constitutes a smart city?
A lot of people are asking that question. It's a new idea. It's an exciting new idea. I think it originated when we started looking at the ability to take streetlights and interconnect them and do things with them and use them as a source of data, use them as a connection point on a distributed communication system, but also use lighting in ways we've never been able to before. And as people's imagination started to catch on, they started saying, well, we could hook up sensors to those lights and use that data system to backhaul information back and be able to utilize that. But the other thing that's looming out there, and I think people need to be very, very wary and conscious of this, is 5G telecom. 5G telecom is going to increase the amount of data involved in communications in cities by thousands of times, not just 10 times more, thousands of times more. And the amount of data that's got to flow is going to be unbelievable. We're talking about large bundles of fiber optics. So the new language we're working with our clients on is something we call vertical assets, which are lighting poles and luminaires and the power supplies to them, which is pretty apparent and pretty important. But the other side of it is the backhaul, the horizontal assets of getting that data somewhere. So it's going to be an interesting struggle, I think, in the next 10 years. Lighting's going to lead, and lighting's been leading really well with wireless communications, sort of avoiding the whole fiber optics, digging up the streets and everything else. But in time, it's going to shift more towards the importance of telecom and the need for high density, really small, physically small cells, many small cells rather than a few large ones like we have with 4G. So the whole change in the city's infrastructure is at heart. To be able to do all the data and analysis that people are talking about being an important part of being smart is going to be much more than just lights. In the lighting industry, we just happen to be leading right now because we can do things pretty inexpensively comparatively.
So, Mark, what role will lighting play in smart cities?
Well, it's going to be the linchpin to connect all of these disparate devices. The one thing that lighting brings to a city is the electrical connection points that are already established. Similar to what it does to interior applications, but exterior is leading the way, if you will. So the smart cities projects are going on worldwide. I was researching India recently and saw the projects that are going on there. They have smart city forums. There's a 3rd forum this year.
In India?
In India. I mean, this is very progressive. When you asked what constitutes a smart city, one of the problems is, and I heard Jim in a conversation mention new language. And one of the problems that we're facing is that we don't have definitions. The accelerated pace of change in lighting has made it to where the standards in many cases haven't been able to keep up with the market shifts. So a definition of smart city, we don't have an ANSI definition. Internet of Things, it's all over the map. What is Internet of Things? Well, we don't have a ANSI definition for that. And these terms are being written down now by various groups. The C137 group is one that has just completed a nomenclature document with some of the new verbiage that we're going to need to use as axioms as we move forward with more standards and we determine what the smart city ultimately will deliver. But lighting's role in it, to get back to your original question, I believe initially will be to provide those access points. A city manager would not be receptive to someone coming in and saying, we're going to put vertical assets every 90 feet along your roadway and trench it and tear up the concrete in the road, and in 2 years you're going to have a great project. The existing infrastructure is already there to build to in terms of the electric connection. Fiber optics and other things, that's another issue.
Shelli, San Diego seems to be pretty far down the road as far as a smart city. Well, what are some of the things they're doing?
Very interesting project. San Diego is definitely leading the way. It has the largest connected platform for smart city in terms of lighting. I think lighting is one part of being an overall smart city. Some of the interesting things that they're doing is they're taking thousands of fixtures with these connection nodes, these sensory nodes, and that's to Mark and Jim's points. We're creating a sensory network with an infrastructure we're actually already very used to. When you have streetlights, you can take these assets. The term to your point. Some of the things they're doing a type of application that allows people to find parking spaces a lot easier with an app on their phone. I mean, we're a connected society. Most folks have a smartphone, so it allows the city to actually be more resilient and more efficient. Instead of having people having to circle the city blocks to find a parking spot, they can actually find it on an app and get there quicker. They're also doing an application that allows them to have public safety in mind with being able to detect gunshots, and not just detect gunshots, but the audio file is sent to the police department so that our first responders can actually go prepared. They understand what type of weapon was discharged. So again, this is all about efficiencies and making places safer and more livable.
I believe that actually happened in Portland, where the police were notified by the software about 5 minutes before someone had called 911, and they were already on their way.
And in some cities, maybe the neighborhood is not inclined to call the police department. So the lights are able to provide that data so that if somebody has been injured, that a first responder can get there in more time than may have been possible.
Mark, a little bit about AT&T, Verizon, Sony, Amazon, all of these companies and 5G. How is that going to affect lighting?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and the telecoms, the electronics companies, and the internet companies all have expressed an interest and financially integrated themselves into lighting in one way or another. So the companies you just mentioned and more see an opportunity here. I was at a presentation recently where a gentleman from Microsoft said, he said that lighting is prime real estate. And a gentleman from Google was there and said there will be a land grab. So who's going to own these existing locations? That isn't completely clear. And the other aspect that I think isn't clear yet, because we're early in this process, is lighting is going to be proportionately a much smaller part of these vertical assets or smart poles in smart cities. Gunshot, pole tilt, these sensors that we're building in for GPS, asset management, seismic activity, temperature, humidity, radiation, pollen, all of these different sensors, and combined with the cameras and the microphones and the landing stations for the Amazon drones on the top of the streetlight.
Right, to recharge.
To recharge, yeah, exactly. Lighting will be proportionally a very small part of this. It appears as if lighting will be part of a digital platform and may ultimately be optional for some of these devices.
Interesting. Jim, what should city managers do if they're planning for smart cities? What should they look for?
The city managers we're working with, and we've had the chance to work a bit on the San Diego project and Oceanside, which is nearby, both with the GE system. And they all ask the same question: what should we be doing with this terrific asset? And Shelli told us some of the most common things, and you did too, Mark, about the first things that are immediately come to mind are things like shot spotters and other technologies that are already well accepted and communities really like them. But the big question is, where does this go? One of the things we have to remember about lighting controls, wireless lighting controls, the mesh network that these are all driven with, is these are relatively low bandwidth systems. They can't carry a huge amount of data, and they can't do it real quickly. There's quite a bit of limits to the speed and capability of these systems, which is why ultimately the horizontal asset is going to change everything. But I want to quick jump to something you were talking about, Mark, which is telecom in particular. California Senate Bill 649, which is now under consideration, I don't think they voted on it yet, is something that lobbyists for telecom have been working on for several years. And that is to limit the amount of money that cities can charge for the real estate rental for those vertical assets.
I don't understand why. Why would they want to limit that?
Because what's happening is cities are saying, we know telecom's going to want to put something on every one of our poles.
Right.
We might have Verizon on that one, AT&T on that one, and somebody else on that one. And they know that real estate's going to be very, very valuable. And they're starting to say, geez, our poles could be a profit center for the community. And the telecom industry is saying, we're going to get hosed if we're not careful on this, so we better get some protections in place. Very, very contentious situation right now.
Right.
But, because cities, frankly, there aren't a lot of cities that you would call wealthy.
Right.
Most cities are, on a shoestring. Even the largest of America's cities are always, one step away from difficulty. And they're looking at this as a way of helping the city be able to provide the services and the utilities. And so it's going to be a real battle for, who's going to come out on top on this one. Is there going to be an equitable solution, which I hope for. So it really is, that's the number one thing they have to think about is the opportunity for income generation from this. Public-private partnerships are talked a lot about these days as a way of dealing with some of these situations. There's going to be a lot of interesting legal, financial solutions to whose real estate that is and who gets the ability to do what on it. I'm really pretty excited about how all that's going to work out, but working in this field is going to challenge all of us, I think, because we've never had to deal with these issues before, and now they're on our plate.
To your point, Mark, if lighting becomes a smaller portion of the asset, do we worry about the quality of lighting?
Yeah, I've been going to Internet of Things conferences to get the perspective that they have on lighting, and lighting's often mentioned. When it's mentioned, it's usually mentioned as something easy. And this confused me at first. But speakers, and I've heard this repeatedly, will stand up on a stage and they'll say, lighting's easy, wait till you have to deal with my stuff. And they're talking about sensors that they may be making, software that they're creating. And at first it struck me, these are intelligent people. Why do they think lighting's easy? Because having been in the industry for a while, I understand the complexity behind the scenes. But they're looking at it, I believe, as a user. And many lighting users think that everything they need to know about lighting's in the aisles of a big box store. All right? They don't understand what goes on behind the scenes because our industry has been very insular and we talk amongst ourselves. Right? So my fear is that as these larger companies show an interest in integrating lighting into their projects, they're going to look at lighting as something simple, a commodity, paper towels, if you will,
Right.
and they'll just put it in place without consideration of quality. And that's where the IES is actively engaged right now.
Are there downsides to smart cities? Things we haven't thought about?
Yeah. Yeah. There's,
Yes.
Please.
Well, to Jim's point about cities aren't, is the perception of this is going to be too expensive to do. It's kind of that upfront cost that could present a hurdle. And yet, when you really look at the benefits that you will get time after time after time of installing this sensory grid, will definitely outpace that upfront cost and bring those benefits and, again, help cities be more resilient. So I think there's a lot of perception out there. And again, Mark's point about lighting's easy, as all folks in the industry know, lighting's complicated. And now to add all of these other aspects with IoT and controls, smart controls, that adds a whole nother dimension that we haven't thought about until very recently. So,
If I could add about IoT, we're working with a group now called the Internet of Things Ready Alliance, which is lighting manufacturers getting together to say, well, everybody's talking about IoT and everybody's talking about IoT being part of lighting being the physical platform for IoT. Shouldn't we have some standards? Shouldn't we make it not only sort of very easy and accessible, we need to make it very robust, not hackable. All those things should be part of the thought process. And this alliance is getting together to try and figure some of these things out. So there is enough standardization so that everybody can take advantage of it well, without having incompatibilities and all the other things we deal with right now.
Are there only lighting companies in the IoT Ready Alliance?
So far, it is a lighting-centric organization, largely because lighting is being looked at as a platform for so many things we could do today, readily, quickly. We talk about, for example, in outdoor lighting, we mentioned the shot spotter system, which is a very clever system, and it's probably typical of what somebody might think of. Oh, okay, we can buy this sensor and hook it up to the IoT Ready connector, and we're done. And that's what the world wants, is we plug it in and we're done. Not the things we typically go through with ordinary so-called IoT appliances and things today. That's where it's got to go. And it will go there, and it'll go there quickly. I'd just like to add one other thing, though, about one of my concerns. In addition to, yes, lighting's not as easy as some people think it is. That's a very fair statement. But the other thing is to start looking at lighting poles. Have you ever seen a pole fully equipped with a complete telecom installation? If you have, you realize they're big, they're fat, they're really unattractive, and things are only going to get worse with 5G. So we have to start imagining a different street sculpture, street scape, street architecture that embraces it rather than just hangs it out there. We've spent a century trying to make lighting poles and things, if not beautiful, at least innocuous. This is going in a whole nother direction. So it's going to complicate things for civil engineers, because when they're big and they're fat, they also have a greater wind load and they're going to need bigger foundations. They're going to be heavier, they're going to be this and they're going to be that. And that whole conversation's really not out there yet. You build the foundation before you build the house. We haven't been talking much about foundation. And the foundation of data communications, backhaul is the new phrase I kind of like about getting all that data somewhere. So, and cities have to start looking at this as not only critical infrastructure from a data standpoint, they need to look at it as critical infrastructure from a complete city management, public safety, and everything else standpoint. We already had one incident in California where a major fiber data line was dug up, we think on purpose, to demonstrate how easily the system can be circumvented with a little bit of terrorism type stuff. And we have to be conscious of the importance of hardening our systems while we do it as well. It's a much different world than it was only a few years ago, and we have to think about these things.
Very true.
Those are excellent points on the downsides, and certainly the point that Jim raised about aesthetics is going to be important. But there's another downside that I think is more important than any at this time, and that's the security aspect of this. The data that's collected, who's going to own it, who's going to use it. And there's a creepy aspect to this too. If we have video surveillance with facial recognition on these poles, and we have iPhone beacon and other devices, your location could be easily pinpointed at any given time. And that's giving up some personal freedoms. Over time, maybe people will come to accept that. So there's
Amen.
yeah.
I remember New York is putting these in
Yeah.
by some of the tunnels. And they're these big, massive towers, and nobody knows what they are, and nobody will say what they are.
Yeah.
And it's suspected that it's Homeland Security, and nobody really knows what's going on in those towers.
How this data is analyzed, who owns it, it's going to be invasive. And there are people talking about data security right now, but we don't have the standards in place for it as we're moving forward at such a rapid pace.
Could smart cities be overhyped? Are we overhyping it?
To some degree, yes. And again, the points that have been made, if cities aren't ready, they're not prepared, their infrastructure isn't prepared, they will look at possibly incurring costs that they weren't anticipating. The bandwidth that you mentioned earlier as well. So I think that really we're going to see a new type of, urban planner, urban developer, architect planners that are really trying to encompass what we can do with all of this ahead of time, rather than trying to move as fast as we are and throw that on. At the same time, my personal opinion is I think it's good. I think it's good that people are looking at what can we do now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Mark one time at a conference said, we don't know what we're going to be looking at 30 years from now, but if we can start to at least plant those seeds,
Right.
maybe we'll be where we need to be within the next decade or two.
Closing comment?
I'll just add to that. I think smart cities aren't overhyped at this point. I think the potential is just now being tapped. My concerns are that moving forward, people's personal securities are taken into consideration, and that the lighting industry plays an important role. And quality would be an aspect of that. But the potential is exciting. And there's, the train's left the station. We're not going to turn this around and stop at this point. We just need to be careful how we move forward.
Jim?
One of the things we're doing with the so-called smart cities today, for example, we adjust the light output to match the needs of that particular block, that particular area. And we can do that dynamically. We could literally turn the lights up, turn the lights off. And we can use these as strategic assets to support law enforcement and first responders. Kind of cool things that we can do with just the lighting portion of it. And keeping in mind the limited bandwidth, there's still bandwidth, and there's still a lot of things, there's a lot of time we could be sending a lot of data around. We're also using it for energy management. Very important aspect of what we do with LED street lighting improvements is we reduce the lighting power by typically 50 to 60% at full output. But if we can reduce it another 50% of that, all right, so we're down in the 20% power area, we can do that through a large portion of the night, which not only improves the night sky and all of its impacts, but it saves a lot of money. And to replace existing legacy lighting systems with LED, it costs money. And recovering that investment and turning that into an equivalent of a profit center is a typical part of any project. So being able to use the smart city system just to save energy, and it can be used for related things like meter reading and stuff like that. That's a great tool in and of itself that doesn't necessarily get deeply involved in some of the things that Mark expressed concern about, and I share, by the way. That was really good.
Certainly.
I think the adaptive lighting that you're discussing is really crucial. One of the beauties of all this data is to create algorithms that can be more predictive, that this street is not really used much at 2 a.m. in the morning, let's lower the light levels, let's save additional energy. The algorithms that are going to start being developed by all this data, that's what's really exciting. So I think we're seeing a whole new industry. We really are. And just within our own lighting industry, there's so many different directions, whether it's interior or exterior. And that's why, again, I think city planners and city architects really need to take a different spin as to how they're going to move forward.
Okay, well guys, this was a great discussion and I thank you all.
Thank you.